Hello there and welcome everyone to this long-awaited Q&A video. 2 years in the making. Well, I said this was going to be a live stream a couple of weeks ago, but I overestimated something. If I started a live stream with so many subscribers asking for questions, I would just get lost in the comments and I will not be able to keep track with it. So I asked my Patreon members for questions, as well as my Discord channel members, and they came up with some great questions that incorporate everything you want to know about the film for the past couple of years. So here we go.
I'm sorry.
Everyone.
For
Butchering your names. Alan Parker asked, how do you differentiate between effects that need to be redone or enhanced and effects that are good the way they are? Is it a personal choice or from feedback from others? Great question right from the start. Well, the short answer is, if something doesn't line up visually with previous portrayals in prequels, or especially saga films, then I will change that to match those films. If the logic in certain moments feels a bit too stretched, I will use visual effects to justify it, or at least adjust it into something more believable. Otherwise, it stays as it is in the series. There's a bit of narrative floating around that I'm just fixing the visual effects in the Kenobi show, and that's not really the case. The visual effects in the Kenobi show aren't bad at all, but some elements are clearly inconsistent with how they appear in other shows and films, so I'm trying to honor that. The most obvious example is the Grand Inquisitor. He looks wrong in Kenobi show because he's a Padawan, and we already seen that species in Revenge of the Sith. The fifth brother, for example, first appeared in Rebels, and yes, it's a cartoon, and if we allow for some creative freedom, still his eye color and facial patterns look completely different in Kenobi show. And yes, there are also some smaller changes I made simply by choice, because this is my one take to make a Star Wars film and I wanted to go all in. And yes, some changes were inspired by the feedback I got from others. But my main focus was always the story I'm trying to retell, not fixing the visual effects for their own sake. And actually, out of 700 visual effects shots that I did for this film, only 3 of them are actual fixes of the mistakes I noticed in the series. Mistakes like that happen on every film and series, and 3 out of more than 700 is still a very good statistics for the original artists. But I was thinking, since I had some more time on my hand and a lot less stressful environment, I decided to fix them. For the second question, Connor Eberhard said, are there any changes you wanted to make in the movie that we won't see due to the complexity of shots needed or incompatibility with the existing story? Yes, a few ideas didn't make it in, and I will tell you about 2 biggest ones. For the first one, I wanted to show Obi-Wan in his Clone Wars armor, but technically it wasn't possible at the time. Remember, I started this long before AI tools were available or at least useful. Sometime later, my friends and I went to Comic-Con in Stuttgart, here in Germany, and we saw this amazing cosplayer who needed just a tiny bit of help with deepfake to pull this idea off. And he even agreed to do it, but in the end there was no place for that in the film, because there's no deeply traumatic link between that version of Obi-Wan and Darth Vader that would justify showing it in the film. Another idea I had was Vader visiting Padme's grave on Naboo as a final step in letting go of his past. We even had the perfect location for filming it in Zagreb, but again I decided that focus should stay on Anakin's connection to Obi-Wan. Which brings me to this question. Juan Pablo Castañeda said, where is Padme? Is she safe? Is she alright? And yes, Padme is in the film. Not by name only, but visually she is in the film. The only thing is, her memory only adds to Darth Vader's suffering. It's never the main focus of it. So that's why I dropped this idea of grave visit in the end. But as it turns out, you have some great fan films on that topic, so you can check them out. For our next question, also Juan Pablo Castañeda said, with the current boom of AI, I wanted to know your opinion on using it for small details like adding new dialogue or extending scenes, and to find out if you already done anything in the film with these new technologies. So, about the AI. Look, as a tool, it can be great, but I'm careful not to get carried away by it, because then it opens the whole Pandora's box of possibilities. So right off the bat, if you're wondering if I'll be using AI to create complete sequences out of nothing, out of thin air, no, I'm not gonna do it. There is no text-to-image or text-to-video materials in this film, because the story was rewritten in 2022 and early 2023, and back then I already found a solution for everything that I wanted to do without it. That being said, now that AI tools exist and they are quite useful, I'm using them carefully for things like rotoscoping, small timing adjustments, relighting certain shots, some simple removals, motion capture and character motion control, and most importantly, yes, for some new lines that will be spoken in the film, and that's mostly for Obi-Wan and Tala. Even then, AI will only act as a voice changer, while the actual performance will come from the actual voice actors. So, to give you my final verdict on this, as long as you're using AI to tweak the existing material, then I'm fine with it. But as soon as it becomes too apparent and it takes you out of the experience, then I'm not fine with it. For our next question, Linus Valet asked, I find your talk about pacing, framing and storytelling the most interesting. Most famous filmmakers are very delicate with this. From Bergman to Tarantino. George Lucas has this too. What would you want to tell Disney's directors and editors about pacing and framing? Well, I'm not really in a position to lecture anyone, but my advice would be this. Take your time, don't focus only on action. We all saw how this approach turned out in The Rise of Skywalker. This film is action only, and after some time your brain becomes numb to it. So, spend some time with the characters, show us their struggle and fears, build the atmosphere, lay out the pieces before the game begins, and that way, when the action truly starts, it carries more weight. And this was especially challenging in Trials, because I'm cutting down nearly 5 hours of series into 2 hours of film, and I'm also adding some moments that were never in the series to begin with. So yeah, balancing the pace for Trials, so it doesn't rush and still has room to breathe, was really tough. As for framing, well, I often feel that in many shows, not just the Star Wars shows, the camera is simply placed in front of actors without much thought. Framing is a very powerful storytelling tool. It can show you isolation, shock, unease, wonder, sense of scale, sense of insignificance. So feel free to play, experiment with it, let it say something to the audience once they see the shot. So for our next question, Damien Persnuk, asked, if you were to make a similar edit of episode 9, would you make Ben Solo alive at the end? Yes, because The Force Awakens set it up perfectly. Remember when Kylo Ren said to Darth Vader's helmet, I will finish what you started? Well, they had the perfect opportunity to pay that off in the end, with Ben being the one to destroy the Emperor, and thus finishing what his grandfather, Anakin, has started, destroying the Sith. Damien also asked, did you see Hal's The Rise of Skywalker Ascendant? If yes, what do you think about it? For those who don't know, it's a fan edit, and yes, I've only seen The Rise of Skywalker once, at the premiere. The second time was Hal's edit, and I honestly prefer it over the original one, and I love every single decision that's made in that fan edit, especially at the end when Palpatine is finally destroyed. Spoilers, I guess. For our next question, Alex asked, would you like to do an old school one-man foreground voice Croatian dub? We don't do that here, we don't do that in Croatia. We were probably thinking about the Polish dub, but now that you mentioned it, yeah, it would be fun to try. For our next question, Yetskel Binstock asked, what's the likelihood in percent that it gets finished this year? Well, here you go. 50% it's finished, 100% it's not. Just kidding, so here's the real answer. In my latest video, I mentioned that other people are also contributing to this film, so I can't log them into artificial deadline. Will I finish visual effects this year? Yeah, probably. Will the composer and sound designer finish this year? We don't know that, and that depends on when they start working. For question number 9, Vincent Antobra said, what spoke to you about the Kenobi show as being bad enough to need fixing, but good enough to deserve fixing? Which I agree with, by the way, so glad to see you going all in on this. Well, I've got the idea after watching the first episode of the series. At that time, I didn't know where this series is going to go or how fans would react to it. The only thing I knew is I wanted to turn it into an anthology film that we never got, complete with John Williams music and the proper look of the Grand Inquisitor. Of course, from there the idea grew, and as for whether the series was worthy, well, it has Obi-Wan, it has Darth Vader, it has some strong moments, so that was enough for me to start crafting a new narrative around the series. In particular, I care about these characters, this story, the events the series is trying to connect, so that's why I'm editing this series and not the other ones. For our 10th question, Damien also asked, are you planning to include subtitles to your project, like Spanish, French, Croatian and so on? And yes, once the runtime is fully locked, including logos at the beginning and fully created end credits, I will export that version for translation. I've already received many offers from fans to translate the film into their own languages, so we'll set up a dedicated Discord channel for that, and most major languages will be included with the initial release of the film. For our next question, Darren Turber asked, if possible without getting into spoilers, what would you say is the most difficult shot or edit to get right in Trials of the Master? Well, that would certainly be change of background for the final duel, also creating one new sequence in the middle of the film, and re-editing of the entire opening. And that means the first 20 minutes of the film, because it's the setup for a lot of things that will be important later in the film. And for our last Patreon question, Brian Martin said, as a side project, do you think you could fix the obvious visual continuity errors in the prequel trilogy, like shadows disappearing or changing directions between the shots, or Ewan McGregor changing hairstyle and makeup in The Phantom Menace, and the shots where his Padawan braid is over the wrong ear, or that one shot where Mace is arriving on Naboo with the other Jedi in the background, but it's clearly not Samuel L. Jackson. And the other little things like Anakin's black glove not being on his right hand when he puts his hood up after he arrives on Mustafar. Now, smaller continuity issues in the films don't bother me much. Many of them come from simple shot flipping, and any fan editor can do that for their own film. Now, the Mace Windu one could be fun to do, but one edit I will do after Trials is finished is related to Rogue One, and it goes back to the consistent character portrayal, which I spoke about in the first question. Now, we all know that Darth Vader's helmet in A New Hope is scratched and worn. We can see fingerprints, damage, brush marks, all of it. In Rogue One, that helmet is perfectly clean, even though it should be the exact same helmet just hours earlier in the story. Now, that famous hallway scene was the perfect chance to explain that wear and damage. We had blaster fire, sparks, smoke, physical impacts, so a natural in-universe reason for how the helmet ends up looking the way it does in A New Hope. So it won't be read as production limit of the time anymore, it will be read as the battle damage from earlier in the story. So it will be even funnier when Leia is making all sorts of excuses in Tantive 4 in front of Vader. He can literally say,
You wanna know how I got these scars?
And so yeah, I will make that small edit and release it online so others can include it in their own fan edits. And that was about it from my Patreon members. Now let's jump a little bit on my Discord server. So our first Discord question comes from Keyboard Smasher. Question. Most of our favorite fan edits usually release in phases of workprints. V1, V2, V3, since it gets a viable vision across sooner and allows to perfect it over time. Did you initially consider taking this approach? And if so, why the change? Yes, I considered that early on, when my only goal was to adjust the Grand Inquisitor and Fifth Brother, add a little bit of John Williams music, and create a theatrical cut of the series. But once I saw the bigger story potential, the list of changes grew far beyond a simple proof of concept. And doing that version for the workprint only would have taken a lot of time, only to be discarded by the community when they don't see the changes in context with other changes, which also take a lot of time to make. So yeah, that standard procedure just wasn't possible for me. Now, also with so many changes, I wanted people to experience the film as something new, to give you all that communal fan watching experience, and posting every edit publicly would ruin that. Now, there will be a test audience, made of hardcore fans, critics and fan editors, and they will all watch it from their own perspective. I will also show Final Cut to the film professionals outside of the fandom, just to hear what they have to say. So what you will get in the end is a refined version, approved by the community, just not publicly step by step. For the next question, Rukapuma asks, do you lean more episode 3 or episode 4 for pacing and structure? I feel like the Kenobi series tried to have the best of both worlds and didn't really succeed at either. Well, with so many things happening in Trials, it will definitely be much more packed than episode 4. Pacing wise, it's closer to the prequels, but it also includes some elements that prequels don't, like introspection and flashbacks. So since this is an anthology film, I took some creative freedom there. Structure-wise, we'll have to wait and see what the test audience will say about it. For the next question, Swanee22 asked, I have two questions related to the score. First, why do you think Ariel Contreras will be a good fit as your composer? And the second one, George Lucas had a vision for the Star Wars score that it would be an orchestral track reminiscent of Hollywood's golden age. So, as a guide, he provided John Williams with a handful of classical music pieces, some of which Williams almost copy and pasted, that conveyed the mood he wanted for the film. Will you be providing the same style of guidance to Ariel? If so, would you mind sharing a classical piece you selected? Excellent question. Well, Ariel has incredible musical background, and I loved everything I've heard from him so far. He will fit this film perfectly. Now, while editing, I do use temp tracks, but with his experience, he may not even need them. For the record, when editing, I'm using the soundtracks from Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. Now, what I will keep and hand over to him are John Williams' established motives, like Imperial March, the Force theme, Leia's theme, and so on. Those are the backbone of Star Wars, those are the identity of Star Wars, and they will come up on the appropriate places in the film. But building of the atmosphere, emotion, and rhythm, that will be entirely up to him. For our next Discord question, Sam Y asked, is it fair to expect a trailer either this or next year? And do you know whether the trailer could feature the composer's music? Well, I decided to release the final trailer once I have the release date completely set, because I don't want to make the same mistake for the third or fourth time already. And for that next trailer, the final trailer, I want to give you a glimpse of where things will go and what's the concept of this film finally. And for the second part of your question, yes, I will ask the composer to make a leitmotif for one pretty important part of the film, and I want to feature it in the next trailer, because it will be very important in the film in general. And our latest Discord question comes from the Shivest. Will it have an opening crawl? Oh my god! You know, you're lucky that I don't post that often and people want to hear more about this film. So here we go, those are actually good questions. So, question number 1, will it have an opening crawl? I personally like the spin-off films not having them, like Rogue One and Solo doing a different version. Yes, there will be no crawl in Trials of the Master. It's an anthology film, and prequels are the crawl for Trials of the Master. Question number 2. Why not call it Kenobi a Star Wars story to keep uniformity with the other spin-offs? It gives me a bit of OCD to have it break the format. Well, the original title for this film was Kenobi a Star Wars story, and that name was even in the first teaser for the film. And you know who else had this idea? Every other fan editor who made this series into a film. So I wanted to make it a little bit more specific, so I changed it. Question number 3. In what stage of the process are you? Are you almost done with visual effects and moving to audio? Or is the visual effects workload still substantial? Well, visual effects load is still heavy, but voice recording will start soon. And it has to start soon because my cousin, who lives in Croatia, she's 13 and she has the perfect Leia voice and accent, but I'm worried if she hits puberty soon I will lose my Leia voice, and then I don't know what to do. Question number 4. Will you try to take out people calling him Obi-Wan to better match his reaction to hearing the name Obi-Wan in A New Hope? Well, only Yoda and Darth Vader call him Obi-Wan in the film. That was inevitable because of the way they speak. But everyone else calls him either Ben or a general. 10 years between Trials and A New Hope is still technically a long time, but also Obi-Wan bends everything he tells Luke in a certain way in A New Hope, so we need to be a bit more careful when trusting him. Also, Leia never hears the name Obi-Wan mentioned in the film, not even Kenobi. Question number 5. What scenes or sections of the movie are you most proud of? Well, that one's short. The beginning, the sequence that's in the middle of the film, and the sequence that's near the end of the film. Question number 6. Will you do test screenings to a small audience for quality control before you release it publicly? Yes, already answered that. Question number 7. Will you release an HDR version? So no, there won't be HDR version. I'm working with SDR 4K footage, and switching to HDR workflow would mean redoing all the visual effects shots again. On the other hand, SDR has worked for the past 50 years, so I think we're fine here. And the last question. Do you plan on dubbing it in other languages? Spanish for my nephew. Well, as I said, subtitles will be available. Dubs are a little bit more complicated. Because of the new dialogue, the original dubs won't work. I will provide the dialogue tracks separately so that fans can create their own dubs later, either by using voice actors or AI, or the combination of two, and then I will bring this dub back to my film, export it as a separate version, language version, and I will upload it to the same sharing site, probably Google Drive or some fun edit sharing site, where the main version of the film will be. So that's about it. Thank you to my Patreon members, thank you to everyone who participated with your questions, thank you for your patience and support, and see you soon! So, in 25 days, life will take me to Galaxy's Edge in Orlando. And for the first time in my life, I will see my favorite starship, the Millennium Falcon, life size, but with a square dish.